pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight downside of speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Everybody, we're back with NSF Live, and I'm going to do my Daz impression to start with. So, first of all, can you all hear us okay? Do a 5x5 in chat, as Daz always does. So, I'm going to copy him, and then we're going to go and see these live views of Starship SN15. Survived. She's not in bits. She's not all over the landing pad and all over the local area. She has survived. She landed. It's been a successful flight, and they have saved and recovered her. So now we're all in the situation now of waiting to see what they're going to do with her next, because Elon has said he is considering, he said might fly SN15 again. So that could be very intriguing, because that'd be another massive milestone for SpaceX. We know they're shooting for orbital, but if they refly SN15, that in itself is a major milestone. But first of all, let's introduce everybody. I'm Chris Bergin. I run the site. I started as a shuttle site, which is why we're called NASA Spaceflight, before anyone starts saying, why are you called NASA? That's our history, but now we're covering a vehicle that shuttle always wanted to be. This is what we really are looking forward to for the future. This is a new vehicle that could really bring a massive capability to humanity and basically build a city on Mars. That's where this is all heading, and that's why we're all fascinated by it. We're also joined by Michael Baylor. Say hello, Michael.
How's everyone doing? And hopefully, I really want this thing to fly again, Chris, because I want as many test flights as possible, just because they're so entertaining to watch. Nothing really more than that. I just like seeing these things fly. It's obviously so exciting, and I hope we're going to get to see a couple more with clear skies before they move on to the orbital launch attempts.
Indeed, and we're also joined by Jack, the man, the legend. That is Jack. I don't know if Jack's on comms, but say hello if you are. That'll be a no for now. When he is back on, we'll introduce him again. Oh, there he is. Hang on.
Because I don't want to blast.
It's the famous "Am I a robot?"
Am I a robot?
Ah, you better know.
All right. Well, what's up? We got a Starship sitting here, a couple hundred, or maybe a couple tens of feet away from the road. I'm a bad judge of distance.
Completely crazy. How does it feel just being there, seeing a Starship that's landed this time? Because you've been out there so many times. So this time you've seen a recovered Starship that's landed.
I mean, it's pretty wild. I was really worried that when they landed it and they brought the crane out to the launch site, Isla, I thought they were going to hook the crane up to it immediately and start securing. And it's been, 2-3 days now where it's just been sat on the landing pad. And it's really cool because it's quite a sight to see Starship just hanging out on the mega transporter, just sitting here so much closer, like unobstructed. There's just a dinky chain link fence between us and it, and it often blows over. So it's wild. It feels surreal. I've probably described way too many things out here as surreal, but it really does feel not of this reality.
We're asking in chat, when shave, are you going to do a reveal of breaking news today about that situation with your beard, Jack?
Yeah, I did shave. Check out my Instagram story if you want to see the progression.
Can the moderators in chat please link Jack's Instagram so everyone can see the update to Jack's when shave situation? Because that'd be something we would like to all. I'm sure everyone in chat would like to see. But yeah, if you've got any questions, by all means, at NASA Spaceflight, and we'll get as many questions done as possible. But I know one question, because I got in early, was repeatedly posted about when they could potentially launch SN15 again if they go with that plan. First of all, it depends if that plan sticks. You've got to understand, when you cover SpaceX Boca Chica, or SpaceX Starbase, as Elon's calling it now, the plans change at the drop of a hat. They are constantly evolving and working out what's the best process forward, because their immediate goal is orbital. So you can imagine they've now got a Starship which has launched and landed successfully, and they can now take the options of using SN16 to go higher. They could use the option of doing SN15 again, as Elon's intimated on Twitter. They could basically say, okay, we're happy where we are, now let's go orbital. These are plans that people are hearing, and you'll see it. You'll see people post at the time of hearing what they've heard, and then literally half a day later, that plan's changed. So that's what you got to appreciate. It's a very fluid situation. I'm writing a Starship update article for Sunday, and I am just like, I've thrown my arms in the air and said, right, I'm just going to give the options rather than stating what we've heard is going to be happening, because by the time I publish that article, it'll change the next day. So that's the way it works. But yeah, it's very much a fluid situation. When SM15 could launch again, well, first of all, they've got to get her back onto a launch mount. Would they then do another static fire? Would they change out any Raptors? There's lots of ifs and buts about what they could do. But I think we're going to watch the flight replay again now. I think Michael may want to introduce this.
Yeah, so while we wait for Jack to get his camera set up, we're going to take a quick look at our video, which we published earlier this week, of the test flight with all of our different camera angles. And of course, like I mentioned, it was super cloudy, but we did get some awesome shots of both the launch and the landing, Chris.
We did. It was a stunning thing because, again, with the SN11 situation, it was in a fog bank and the weather was hardly great. It was better, but it wasn't brilliant for viewing what happened after launch immediately and then just before landing. We never got to see the flip really, did we? Apart from a few dodgy onboard views because they had a bit of problems with the SpaceX feeds cameras. So we didn't get to see everything that was going on, and there's been obviously speculation and obviously information regarding how the engine situation worked, because it was prefaced by John Innsbrucker as a 3-engine flip and a 1-engine landing, and we saw it was a 2-engine landing. So we can assume they've changed something there. But even if that was the case, and this is without being any like SpaceX fandom or anything like this, is objectively looking at this. If they did have a change to the engine situation coming back down, that is a learning experience, and it's worked. So that is a bonus. And there's the launch. Obviously with 3 Raptors.
I like how the camera gets shaken so badly that it starts tilting down. It's kind of crazy.
And can you imagine 28 Raptors? That's what I always say to people. I say, people who look at these things like almost casually always say, wow, there's a lot of power from those engines. And I keep reminding them, that's just 3 engines. That's just 3 Raptors. Super Heavy will launch with 28. Which will be something else.
That plume from these 3 Raptors is so incredible because the methane burns so cleanly that you just get that clean flame, absolutely no exhaust or anything behind it. It's just water and carbon being released as the exhaust.
3,000 feet. That's why they don't let me commentate on launches, because I just go all Walter Cronkite on people.
This is, of course, Mary's view, as she got a pretty nice shot of Starship heading up into the clouds as well. But it's really the landing that was the exciting part of this launch, of course, because we have seen this part happen. I mean, this is obviously super cool, but we've seen a launch happen several times. What we have not seen happen is a Starship soft land until this past week, when Starship SN15 became the first Starship ever to successfully softly land after performing a high altitude test flight.
Well, Denise, Michael, I think you might need to turn your volume up because people in chat are saying you're very quiet. It may be the Raptors. Everyone's quiet over Raptors, but another thing I'd like to point out is that Mary's been watching this and filming this and documenting this since Starhopper and pre-Starhopper. If you look back on our first videos on the channel, which was not the first videos Mary did, she did the videos on the forum first, which is why I moved to her channel, because it made more sense for bandwidth purposes. Mary was filming Starhopper back in the early days, way before flight, before the 150 meter hop. So for her to film this, a successful Starship launch and land. I know SN10 landed, but it wasn't fully successful, but it actually blew up afterwards. And then we were all fearing at this point, when we saw the fire coming out of the aft of SN15, we all feared that in a few minutes' time after landing, she might do the same as SN10. So it's a very, it was very nice to see the fire being put out by the fire suppression system at the pad, which obviously worked very well. And of course, the other thing was she was on her landing legs, which is something SN10 didn't do. due to the hard landing anyway, which would have squashed leads had they all deployed. So it was a lot of successes for this flight. And I think that's why Elon was pretty quick to tweet that it was a nominal landing, because it was. It succeeded in coming down at the right speed this time. SN10 to me looked quite good, I must admit. I thought SN10 was coming down slow enough, but Elon said it was too fast. We could see the difference with this one. This one was coming down very slowly, which allowed for the leg deploy and allowed to land on legs without crushing them. So that was a big win.
Yep. And if you kind of look closely, you can see that there are definitely two engines that were ignited. But the interesting thing is, Chris, I don't think we never really saw three engines for the landing. Now we don't know if that was
No.
just because they were behind the clouds and the SpaceX official feed had the Raptor engine camera, but that camera was cutting in and out a lot, so we're not really sure if three engines ever ignited on the flip like they were supposed to. And we also saw that the two engines that did ignite were not the optimal engines for the maximum lifting or the most optimal lever arm, as Elon had mentioned. So it is possible that perhaps that engine out redundancy came to use for this landing, because it seems like for whatever reason they had to switch to their backup set of engines.
To your
Because I know
earlier,
Sorry,
to your
Jack, go on.
slightly earlier point, Chris, 10 did look good, but I will say, coming in from landing, but I will say, as soon as I saw 15 come out of the clouds, I was like, okay, they've got it, going to land. I mean, 8 was like, oh, maybe, no. 9 was like, immediately, no. 10
Yeah.
was kind of like, maybe, oh, kind of, maybe. And then, 7 minutes later, it blew up. But this one, absolutely, as soon as I saw it come out of the clouds, very obvious. Okay, yeah, they got it. Sure enough, they did.
This shot is so cool with falling from the clouds. Look at his landing legs.
We've been watching these. Yeah, look at his landing legs come out now. There we go. Popped out there.
Tiny little stubs.
Hashtag tiny little stubs.
Bring up the analogy of watching Falcon 9 boosters landing on the drone ships and LZ1, LZ2. It's something that hasn't got boring yet. I don't think it ever will. And now we've got these starships doing these flip maneuvers and landings. When we get a clear day, when we see the flip again, when it's a successful landing, I think that'll be something else. That'll be really surreal, because this one literally came down vertically out of the cloud layer. So it was slightly different to what we've seen before, but the fact that it was a successful landing just made up for all of that.
And of course, they did have that small fire post landing. I don't think that was a big deal or entirely unexpected. Just probably maybe a small fuel leak or something. But they got that out with those fire hoses fairly quickly. And eventually, as I cut back to the live picture here, they managed to, I guess, Jack, we think they probably clamshelled it with that large SPMT. So they had that large transporter that we didn't know what it was for. Some of us, including myself, thought it might be for super heavy transports, but we found out that answer this week when they rolled that large transporter out to the pad and kind of clamshelled the base of that vehicle and chained it down.
Yeah, and that was somebody at the launch site while we were shooting it on the landing pad. Somebody at the launch site mentioned that, hey, we think they wrapped the SPMT around SN15. And I was like, oh, huh. I guess that makes sense, because they didn't use the crane to lift it at all yet. The crane was just moved to the launch site. It hasn't done anything. So, and it also makes sense because the only other time that we've seen that transporter setup used, I think, was with SN9, where they took SN9 out of the high bay and sort of put it on that thing and wiggled it around. At the time, I figured they had used a crane, but now thinking back, I don't think we ever saw them lift SN9 with the crane out of the high bay. I think they might have done that same clamshell thing. Now, I could be wrong, but either way, it would make sense that is this the first version of a hexagrabber? We've been talking about a hexagrabber for so long. The Falcon 9 octagrabber on the barge has an octa web, so there's 8 attach points. But this is, Starship has a hexagonal, whatever the appropriate term for that is. And so hexagrabber. I mean, this thing came up and wrapped around the base of it and lifted it up so that you could see in yesterday's daily video, they were able to pull the legs off. So now SN15 is sitting there without the legs. I mean, in theory, we're talking about reuse earlier. They could just put some new legs on it, put new Raptors on if necessary, or just static fire them again and fly again. The vehicle
Yeah.
is in good enough shape. All they really need is new legs, which they've already taken the legs off. It's to be seen, how that'll play out. But super cool, just super extra cool to see all the little bits and pieces that they've already thought of. It's like, how are they going to land, or how are they going to do that? And trust me, they've thought of it.
And I
Bit
also
deeper into this as well, because we could mention the fact that she wasn't centered on the landing pad; she was right on the edge. But that's a minor thing because they'll get the controllability of that better as they progress. But a shout out to the TPS. That TPS, that large TPS patch, is mostly intact. I think I only saw about one or two tiles that came off, and that is
Yeah,
something they are.
there's
Go
some
on, Jack.
people in the lower smaller patch that are also off, but I forget if those were off before flight from static fire or if they fell off during flight. I'm not. To your point just before that about not being dead center in the landing pad, just to really quickly speculate a little bit. I mean, Michael was talking about, perhaps the engine out capability was used on this due to the way that the two engines were not the optimal lever arm. Perhaps if there was a situation or a burn that was out of normal, maybe that's why they ended up on the very edge of the pad. Because I've seen them have really great precision before, hitting dead center right in the landing pad, not just with Falcon 9, but also with the Starships, even the ones that exploded, hit pretty dead center, right? So it's interesting to note that something might be related there.
And really quickly, I want to introduce another person to the broadcast today. Out in the field, we also have a camera view from the production site right now. And who in chat can guess which member of the team is providing this camera?
I know
If
chat will
you
go
can't guess
crazy.
it by now, if you cannot guess it by now, you must have not been watching many of our videos, because yes, we do have Mary as well out there getting us the production side. You can see on the right, there's a Starship section probably with some heat shield tiles on it. So that's interesting. I'm not sure which Starship that is for. Maybe Mary knows, but also the third ground support equipment tank is there on the left. That's the tallest structure in your shot.
And chat did go crazy. Mary MVP.
And yeah, Chris, if you want to get some questions from chat, that would be good. But Mary is telling me that is SN17 on the right there. So they are already stacking SN17 in the mid bay right now, with SN16 currently stacked in the high bay. SN16 is fully stacked with the nose cone included. SN17 still has some of the tank sections being put together, but it just shows you how quickly their production is ramping up.
Thomas asks a question here. He asked, launching Starship to Mars is like sending a volume of the ISS to Mars, which begs the question, how many people could the ISS sustain without resupply for 6 months? Even with new tech, it's not 100. No, it's not 100. The resupply situation on the ISS always works like a 12-month cadence. So they've always got the supplies in the event the cargo resupply missions go wrong. They have got several options with the cargo resupply, from Progress to Dragon, which is now a Crew Dragon, but it's a cargo version, to Cygnus. No longer got the ATV. HTV, this new HTVX is coming online soon. Now, there's a potential, that's why they have redundancy, because if you lose one vehicle and you've got to stand down to find out what is wrong, you've got the other vehicles that can pick up the slack. But you've got a 12-month cycle where you've got enough logistics to cater for what is literally the continuous presence on the ISS. But that is based around the core of 6 people. Any more than that, which you do get with crew rotations, and during the shuttle days, for example, you could go up to about 12. Any bit more than that, you start really struggling on a consumable standpoint. So I think we're not looking at any kind of event where a Starship would take 100 people to the ISS. That's not going to happen ever. But it's a fair question, because it is quite a massive planning situation with the ISS as far as how many people they can supply on there and keep happy, and also the amount of work they can do on there. There's only so much science equipment, which they all get certain daily schedules where it's planned out. Their day is planned out to the minute, to the hour, where they're doing certain experiments. They've got certain exercise time for 2 hours a day, and they go to bed and they get 8 hours sleep every single night. So it's a very regimented situation there. Sean asks, where is the old Starship part still recycled? So you're looking at like from like SN5, SN6, where they're taken apart, and the BM1 booster that was taken apart. They're taken to a scrapyard, but I don't know where they then take them for recycling, because we've seen a few crashed starships, shall we say. I remember the video Mary got of the digger, which was mercilessly just bashing away at this nose cone to make it fit in the back of a truck. I don't know where that truck took that stainless steel to, but it was off site. So obviously there's a recycling place not too far away from South Texas where they take them to, but we don't know where that is. CMP Roray says he hopes to see it refly and better skies. Yeah, that's what I was literally pointing out earlier. If they do refly it, then hopefully it is in better weather conditions where we can watch a lot more of the flight, such as ascent, the belly flop, the flip to belly flop, and then the flip to landing burn. So that'll be something to watch. And also, if they do it differently with the 3 engines for the flip and the 1 engine for the landing, which I do believe is their primary way of doing things, but with Starship doing it a different way and succeeding, that is a bonus point. Let's face it. It's something that they found is a backup plan that works. And I would assume the vehicle did it herself, so or itself. People don't like saying her, but I do, because it's shuttle and it's the old history of things. Igor, who says, I still don't know what there is no higher in When Hop. Can you explain it? When Hop is a meme kind of thing which came up way back when we're all waiting for a launch. I think it was SN8, and people were asking when will it launch, and it turned into when will it hop, and it turned into when hop. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, whenhop.com.
Indeed, yes, whenhop.com. I do believe that's a site that will take you to some valid information relating to Starship testing. Quick thanks to Nathan as a new member. A bit confused. Igos is a bit confused by the cryo shell tanks at the propellant production site. What is the difference between those and the GSC tanks, which we've seen being built, which look like mini starships in themselves? Michael, do you know the difference between the tanks, these big silver GSC tanks now at the orbital launch site, and those new tanks they're building at the production area?
Yeah, so on Mary's camera on the left, we saw that third GSC tank. So I'm going back to Mary's camera, and just on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the side of that third tank. And you can see the tank looks very similar to a Starship tank. And that's because they're basically just using the same construction methods they use for Starship to construct their ground support equipment tanks. And that is for storing the cryogenic consumables at the orbital launch pad that will be used to launch the Super Heavy Starship orbital test flights. Now, the thing is, when you are storing propellant in a Starship for a short amount of time, it's fine to just have it in a Starship style tank. But when you're going to be storing it for days at a launch site, and you don't want to be you don't want to be losing a lot of it due to boil off as it warms up. You want to keep it cold, and to do that, you need insulation. So those white cryogenic shells that we've seen at the old gas site are for insulation for these cryogenic storage tanks. So this tank that Mary is showing us right now is for storing and actually holding, like liquid nitrogen. But there's other shells are going to be the insulation that will keep this tank extra cold. So this is the inner shell on your screen right now, and those white shells you've seen are the outer shell.
And Dougal asks, what at the time did you realize it was not going to blow up? First thoughts afterwards. Thank you for the question, because that is something where I was holding my breath for a few minutes at least. When the fire suppression system came on, I thought we got a good chance here now. They're going to save the vehicle. And when the fire went out, that's when we all let our breath depart our lungs, because that's when we knew there was less risk of the vehicle going like SN10 did. Luvic asks, did one Raptor fail to ignite? That's what we covered earlier. I wouldn't classify it as fail to relight, if I'm being fair. There's a good chance that if the vehicle worked out, there was not something right with one Raptor, it went to the backup plan of 2 Raptors for landing, which could be the case. Again, I always pause when I make these comments, because it'd be nice for Elon to say. I think Elon was asked several times on his feed and he didn't reply to it. And Elon is notorious replying to questions, even if they're not like from someone with a lot of followers. He'll reply to a question he sees that he feels like he wants to answer. So The fact that he's not answered that question is interesting. I think maybe at the next attempt for launch, we might get some kind of update relating to that. But all we know is it landed successfully. So whatever happened, whatever mitigation they put into that, it's worked out, and that is a bonus. And that's
Yeah.
not glossing over the fact of anything going, not saying, oh, whatever SpaceX does, they can't do no wrong. It is a fact. The vehicle is sat down on a landing pad.
And it's one thing if a Raptor does not ignite or is intentionally not attempted to relight because they knew there was a problem. That would, of course, potentially signal some sort of Raptor issue, which would not be ideal. But that being said, I think assuming a Raptor really did have a problem, the fact that they were still able to land the vehicle demonstrates a tremendous amount of progress from the previous test flights, where issues with a single Raptor engine has basically doomed the landing sequence. So if a Raptor did have a problem, that's obviously not great. You want all your engines to work, but I think the fact that it still was able to land based on some new redundancy that they've added is probably an even bigger win. That kind of entirely, I think if you added them together, I would say it's a net positive over the Raptor issue. So I think it's a very successful result, obviously, with
I
that
agree. And
redundancy working.
I agree, and I think there's also the fact that this is the first vehicle to fly with the upgrades, which included the Raptor engines, and we've seen, and I'll include in an article tomorrow, that they've got this new dual vertical test stand at McGregor. They're built next to the horizontal base, which have now one of us now got a Raptor on it. So they're going through a lot of new Raptors at McGregor, which will supply future Starships and Super Heavies, which also provides confidence because let's remember this is the first vehicle that's gone through a static fire test campaign that I can remember, at least recently, where they've not static fired and had to replace a Raptor. So the Raptors that static fired all flew. It rolled out with, well, it basically went with these Raptors it's been with all the time. There was no swap outs. That's another bonus as well. And with more and more testing at McGregor, we've heard the things about BE4, which is still on a test stand like Raptors are, but they've not flown. Raptors have flown. So they've got a head start if you're going to compare Raptors to BE4. They've got a head start there by flying them and getting these long duration flights out of them, and now a successful landing. So there's a lot of bonuses there. Musical Wolves asks, will SpaceX need a new launch license to replay SN15, or can they use the same launch license that was used on Wednesday? That's a good question. I don't know. Michael, any thoughts, or Jack? I'm thinking yes, because they got a license for like 3 flights almost, so they could technically say, well, this is another flight of the 3, or maybe.
I mean, it's an interesting question because the FAA did approve a license for SN15 through SN17, and I'm not sure if that's a single-use license for each vehicle or if SN15 can fly multiple times under its license. I'm not sure, but whatever the case is, SN15 obviously landed successfully, and there was absolutely no sign of any public safety issues. So if SpaceX did need another launch license for SN15, I don't think it is something that would take long at all. I would be shocked if the next Starship test flight, assuming it's not to orbit, would be delayed by FAA licensing.
Yeah. Christian asks, what could Starship be used to deorbit the ISS module by module, as in module by module, upon its retirement? I don't know if that's even possible, but I do know the plan is right now to use 2 Progress vehicles to deorbit the ISS in one go. So that is the plan. They've been working on this plan for years. I've written a few articles on it, in fact, where the ISS, when it does come to the end of its days, they will take the crew off, obviously. They will shut everything down. They will make it as safe as possible, and then they will dock 2 Progress vehicles and do a deorbit burn, like they do reboosts, but the other way around, and bring the ISS down over the Pacific or in Indian Ocean, I think. So that's the way they're going to get rid of the ISS. So they don't need Starship for that. They have a plan, and it is something that will involve the Progress vehicles. So that's how they're going to do it. Theodos asks, in appreciation of the excellent coverage, thank you very much. When will the heat ablation tiles completely cover the ventral side with the tiles when the tiles act as insulation, and change how the internal rocket components cool, heat, and fueling, launch and landing? Well, that's a question and a mouthful at the same time. I think what you're looking at there is when will we see a Starship with TPS all on the windward side, which is something they require to bring it back from orbital flight because that'd be the re-entry heating. I do believe that's planned for SN20, at least it was, per their orbital attempt. There is a caveat there where they may try an orbital attempt by literally targeting orbit, and then the rest of it's a bonus. So they might not even be too concerned about losing a vehicle during re-entry. They'll go for the data they'll gain from that, as opposed from saying, right, it's our orbital attempt, and the goal is to land it. That's another thing, especially with the booster as well. So there's a lot of caveats involved there, but we have seen from Mary's videos and photographs, a lot of the sections now, the new sections in the tents, are covered in tiles. So there's a fair chance by SN20, or at least close to SN20, we may see a Starship where that black patch of tiles we see there in the middle of the vehicle will cover the entire windward side, which is the side which faces the heating. So that's a fair chance of that happening.
And we obviously saw for SN15, you can see on Jack's camera right there, that smaller patch of heat tiles near the base had some tiles fall off throughout the test campaign, but I believe on that main rectangle, if you will, of heat tiles, only one tile fell off. So obviously for orbital flights, they're going to want a 100% record, but it does seem like with some minor improvements, these heat shield tiles mounting system that they have does seem to be working reasonably well. But
And
I
a
guess
quick, so go on, Michael.
I was gonna say, I guess it is one thing to work on a suborbital test flight. It is another thing to work on a test flight where 30 or 28 Raptor engines are shaking the vehicle. So we'll see how that goes.
And just quick thing I'll say, he sent 121.22 Canadian dollars. That's a lot of money for a question to be asked. Very much appreciated, so thank you very much for that. Some more questions here. Daniel asks, why were there TPS on the fins of SN15 on the other side rather than the rest of TPS? There were small patches on the aero surfaces on the flaps, wasn't there? We've seen
Yeah.
those.
And
Yeah, go on, go on.
I think obviously for reentry it doesn't make sense to put them there, but somebody, I wish I remembered the name, but somebody in chat maybe a month ago or so, had a very good theory, and I think it's probably correct. At least it makes total sense. And their reasoning was, Chris, that the cameras face the other side. So if SpaceX wants to have, visual data of what's happening to the tiles during flight, it makes sense to put the tiles on the side of the flap that is facing the onboard cameras.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Is Starbase going to start, or when is Starbase going to start making their own methane? Asks Marnix. We don't know an exact timeline, but they are currently first they are building a air separation unit that will be used to produce liquid oxygen primarily, but also when you separate the air, you also end up with a lot of nitrogen as well. So they will be producing a lot of nitrogen and liquid oxygen shortly. I'm not sure how long it's going to be until they start producing their own methane, but there is some talk about them, or there were some filings about them potentially reopening up some of the local gas wells to produce some methane. So we'll see how that goes.
And Andrew makes a reference to the Starlink launch, which is coming up. We are going to be covering that live, I do believe, aren't we, Michael? With
Yes,
Chris Gebhardt
Chris.
out there.
Yep,
Yes.
Chris Gebhardt will be out there bright and early Sunday morning. For those of us on the west coast of the United States, that is tonight. Launch is scheduled for 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday morning, or 11:42 p.m. Pacific Time on Saturday night on the west coast. And I think UTC is currently 4 hours ahead of Eastern, so that would be 6:42 UTC on
Don't
Sunday.
I know it? Yeah, I did look at the launch time. I thought it was PM for a second. I thought that's very acceptable launch time, and then no, it's AM. Oh dear. But yeah, it's also the fleet leader. This is going to be booster 1051-10. The first time a rocket, a Falcon 9 rocket with 10 on it is going to be launching. So that becomes a fleet leader. And if that one lands, that really proves a lot of things, because I've still got people in other space companies saying they're not too sure about the viability of reusability just yet because of all the recovery costs and things like that. And I'm thinking, well, is it really a question when you're thinking the alternative is buying and building 10 new boosters compared to launching and landing the same booster 10 times? Well, apparently it still is, but I think that is just their excuse for saying we've not got one which can land yet, so we've got to say that.
Look at this. Mary has moved to a new location, and
Ooh.
there is Starship SN15 in the high bay, and you can see at least one of the aft flaps has been attached. That ring section on the left is blocking the other aft flap, but you can definitely see there on the bottom right of SN16 that there is at least one aft flap attached. So if they do still plan to fly SN16 after SN15's successful flight, potentially we might see that roll out sometime soon, although it sounds like, based on Elon's tweets, their focus might still be on SN15 and getting that to fly again. So we'll see where they take SN15, but if SN15 goes to Pad B, it's probably likely that SN15 will be the next Starship up for testing once again.
Elon, I mean, I'm a hoarder, a bit of a hoarder myself. I don't like throwing things away. I would basically send it. I really would. This is a completely stacked, ready to go Starship by all intents, apart from a few bits and bobs. It's something that where okay, if they want to refly 15, that makes a lot of sense because that's a major milestone if they can refly the same vehicle. That's very much center to what SpaceX is trying to do with their vehicles. So that makes sense. But with SN16 there, ready to go, I think the only question might be how much disruption they don't want to cause to the orbital launch site. And if they really are going for orbital sooner, they will want to focus everything on getting that orbital launch site ready. And then they're going to basically get ready for a super heavy stacking, which makes sense because if you saw Daz's tweet earlier today, which I'm going to find and put in the chat, we could see SN16 making a little sideways move, which he made a joke out, which is quite funny. But it's something where they've almost made space for what will be BN3 now, BN3 stacking, and that will be. Let me put it into chat so you can see what we're talking about there. That'll be something where it's not working now. Try again. 1 second. Let me just delete that and get rid of that. There we go. And we're going to put this tweet into chat, and you can see SN16 just making a little sideways move. It's quite interesting because while that looks quite funny, it does clear the space to start stacking a super heavy booster. And that's where things get really interesting because when we first see this super heavy rolling down Highway 4, that in itself would be an event. We've seen how tall a fully stacked Starship looks like going down Highway 4, rolling to the launch site. Wait till you see a super heavy booster. That'll be something else. And they are going to basically roll it vertically as far as we know. So that'll be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and Mary did confirm that the other aft flap is installed, so SN16 is pretty close to being ready to go if they did want to test it. But like you said, Chris, it's a bit up in the air as to how much they want to keep, interfering with the orbital launch site construction, because every launch campaign delays the orbital launch progress because they have to close the area whenever they test. So we'll see how that trade-off goes. I have heard it has been going back and forth a lot whether or not they want to do more test flights, so I am not really sure which way it's going to end up settling onto, but we will see how it plays out. Sometimes in Boca Chica, the plans change more than once a week, and it can be hard to follow, but I'm hoping we are at least going to see another Starship do a suborbital test flight, whether that be SN15 or SN16.
Yeah, I mean, why would you not fly SN16? It's sitting there, practically ready to go. Come on, fly it already. It's right there. It's right there.
I say send it.
Yeah, send it. I can't even imagine having a vehicle basically fully assembled and ready to go, not flying it. Get the data. Get the data. Come on. Maybe orbital flight will be pushed by like tops. I mean, who cares? I know obviously I'm biased because I want suborbital test flights because they're super cool to watch, but who cares if you go orbital a month or two later, still have the aspirational goal of getting it done by summertime. And more data is not bad. I'm sure the land burn and the whole entire process and flip maneuver, you want to do that as many times as possible to refine all the bugs out of it. And maybe they're feeling really confident now after one, but as somebody who wants to maybe ride one of these today, I'd really like to see them test it a lot, but I also want to see them test it a lot because I'm greedy and I want to shoot more photos of it landing. And the last two of them have been on bad weather days. But really, you would think that it's just they could either refly 15 or fly 6, pretty much no problem with minimal delay. And even 15 progressed through its test case so rapidly that I think the main delay for 15, if I'm not mistaken, was probably weather. So, I mean, if 16 it behaves as well as 15 does, it might not even be that big of a delay to the orbital launch site construction. Just come on, just send it. Send
Yeah,
it.
and another thing, Jack, is that SN15 had to do the cryogenic proof test with the thrust rams because it had an upgraded thrust puck, but they could theoretically install the Raptors and SN16 at the production site, and that would greatly speed up the launch campaign. So it's possible, if they did want to launch SN16, they could hypothetically install the Raptors at the production site, roll out SN16 to the pad, do a quick cryo-proof, a static fire a day or two later, and then fly a day or two after that. So they could do like a 10-day launch campaign if everything went well with SN16.
I mean, that seems like a no-brainer to me, but what do I know, right? Come on, just do it. And of course, with all the bad weather on the scrub day and the bad weather on the flight day, thank goodness it wasn't as bad as for SN11. We could actually see it lift off and land. Obviously, big part, but today it's a beautiful day. Few puffy white clouds, blue sky. Yesterday was a beautiful day, blue sky, puffy white clouds. Come on, let's just get another flight on a nice day. And I mean, all things considered, it really does make you thankful for what a beautiful day weather-wise we got for SN8, for SN, and for SN10. We really got lucky, 3 in a row, and then so hopefully get another test flight under our belts. We get it on a good weather day. At least just one more. Just one more shot of apogee of it hovering along 10 kilometers. Rocket launches are so cool, but a lot of times they're up and they're gone, right? And the coolest thing about Starship right now is it lifts off, hangs out at 10 kilometers and comes right back, and you see it the whole time. It's like a 6 to 8 minute long extravaganza of rocket. I just want more. Give me more.
Yeah, the wind is fighting Jack a bit there, but that is a very good point. And I think our luck might have run out a bit with SN11 and 15 after all those great early test flights. I mean, even SN5 and SN6, while they did not go very high, still had some nice clear skies. And Starhopper as well. So hopefully our luck will be back on our side if they do another suborbital test flight of a Starship. But let's see.
Question from Dima here, who makes a great point. I don't think I really appreciated until I read it, which isn't the biggest success of landing for SpaceX being the fact that they're able to inspect hardware post-flight now. New data they haven't seen before. That is a brilliant point. They have a fully landed Starship that's flown to fully inspect, including the engines, including the aerosurfaces, including the internals. And that may, in fact, slightly delay when this launches again if Elon does stick with that plan or goes with that plan, because he said might when he mentioned it. So that is something where once they've probably inspected parts of it by now already, but when they get back onto a stand, they can really inspect it, and they'll be inspecting a flown Starship for the first time. Brilliant point.
Yeah.
It's like a Dodge Ram.
A question here, do the flap joints need their own heat protection? Well, they will for the windward side, which will face the heating of re-entry on the orbital vehicles. That's something for a fact. So whether or not they will be covered in TPS as such is the question, because we haven't seen a Starship yet that has got that full design of TPS. As production, we've seen renders. Well, a lot of renders, as excellent as they are, and someone brought up on Twitter the other day that SpaceX doesn't need to do renders because the community does the renders, which I think is a fair point, because they are fantastic work by the community. They aren't literally talking to SpaceX and getting the design schematics to make the renders from them, so we don't know what they will actually look like as full-scale Starship with TPS. and then we'll get an idea of what kind of heat protection it'll have over the hinges of the flaps of the aero surfaces. So that's a question we don't know the answer to yet. But obviously, the windward side will face heating. It is on that side, so that's something they will have considered by obviously by all intents. They know what they're doing. So what they've planned is yet to be seen, but they will have thought about that.
I have a proposal. How about we call the windward side the
Should we call them robots? Secret asks, is there any data to be gained from racing two starships? That's something I'd love to see, by the way, now you've mentioned it. No, probably not. It'd be amazing to watch there, because they've got the two launch mounts. We saw the two starships out on the launch sites at the same time. If they launched them at the same time, that'd be quite hilarious. It'd be like Armageddon, where they launched two shuttles at the same time, which apparently they could do. I made, in the early days of the site, we had a lot of shuttle engineers on, and people would ask questions like, from the movie Armageddon, why would they do a film where they launch two shots at the same time? That's stupid. They wouldn't do that. No, they wouldn't do that, but they had the capability. They had the two firing rooms, a redundant firing room. They got the two pads, and they got the vehicles. They could have done it, as Armageddon was showing them, but they wouldn't have. In a real-life situation of Armageddon needing two shuttle launches, they'd have launched them in orbit apart at the very least. That's why they wouldn't have launched at the same time. As far as launching two starships at the same time, it's in my mind's eye now where I'd love to see that. That'd be fascinating to see, but no, I don't think there's any data to be gained from that.
Jack says Starship Bergin adrift. That's what he was trying to say when he cut out. That'd be good.
Fast and Furious reference. Never
Yes,
go wrong there.
Really quick, Chris, I just want to point out, it is crazy. I know we say this a lot, but it is crazy how fast the skyline in Bergin changes. And I love this wider shot where you can see all the different components of the launch site.
Should we go through what we're seeing here for the people who might be new to this? Because from left and right, we can look at the tank farm, which is on the far left-hand side. That's where you see all that activity and the condensing. We all get excited, and where Adrian shouts at people for saying grass fence. Then we got Hopper, the famous immortal Star Hopper, on the far left-hand side. That the famous vehicle that first flew a Raptor, 150 meters, and that was that Raptor SN6, I do believe. That's how far they've come now, where they're into the 60 range. But also, we've got the more tank farm activity. We've got Tankzilla, the big crane there, which is obviously going to be been involved with quite a lot of things recently, including the high bay. I remember was it SN8 which leaned, or was it SN9 that leaned in the high bay?
SN9, yeah.
SN9 leaned, yeah. Tankzilla rolled down Highway 4 to the rescue and secured the vehicle in the high bay. We've got the test nose cone in a nose cone jail. That's there because they're testing the aerodynamic, the aero stresses of what will be orbital flights, just to get some data on that. I do believe they're going to try and test that to destruction, but it never did get that far. So I don't know if they're going to repeat the test and maybe do that, but it's still there in its nose cone jail. It's still not got its bail yet, so I think that maybe the fate for that will be a destructive test at some point. Obviously, with SN15 in view there, we've got the two tanks for the GSC for the orbital tank for the orbital launch site, and more propellant commodity tanks, I call them, there. And on the far right-hand side, we've got the structure that will dominate the skyline in a not-too-distant future. That is the Orbital Launch Site Integration Tower. That is the launch tower that will host Super Heavy. And that is going to be something else. Behind the actual tower, you can see the mount, which will receive the launch table, which will be coming up in a not-too-distant future, because that launch table is ready down at the production site. They'll roll it down Highway 4, which everything gets rolled down, and then placed on top of those pillars. And that will be the host of the Super Heavy, whereas the launch integration tower next to it will build up and it'll be the tallest structure in the region when it's completed. And that will then, at some point, receive two giant mechanical arms, which are designed to catch the booster as it returns to the launch site. So you think things are crazy and exciting now? Wait until you see what's going to in the plans for Super Heavy. That is going to be absolutely balmy. Got lots of questions about TPS, by the way. How do they plan to add a thermal protection system to the fins on Starship? Will they need more flexible material? It's back to the same kind of aero service hinges, aren't we now? More flexible material. Will the fins be pushed back to the body to make the most of to take most of the heat out during re-entry? That's a good question because the aero surfaces aren't really needed until you get back into the atmosphere, obviously. That makes sense, doesn't it? So that will be something where maybe they could just basically fold them in, like we've seen, like now, as we can see in this view, fold them back down and see what happens as far as what when they'll need them, and then extend them for what would be when we see them during the actual belly flop, which is from 10 kilometers onwards. I think the belly flop will start a lot sooner when they come back from re-entry for an orbital inclination. So that is something where we might actually see that being used, but they will still need some heating protection for when they come down during the early part of re-entry entry interface. That will still need, I do believe, some thermal protection system on the hinges.
And we just saw, I think, looked like maybe some condensers going by on that SPMT in front of Mary at the production site. So that was cool.
I'll tell you what, we've got a bunch of TPS fans in chat today. What temperature are they expecting the tiles to have to deal with? What can the stainless steel welds take? We don't know that. I don't think that's been revealed. That'll be something internal to SpaceX. Elon may have made mentions to it during his first Starship presentation at Boca Chica, where he showed the first time the flip maneuver, which was an amazing thing to see for the first time. I don't believe he gave any temperatures or expected temperatures during those presentations there, so we don't know.
A couple more super chats. Paul, thank you so much. And Terry says, Jack, when SN15 broke the clouds, it sounded like Jesus descending from heaven. Sound the trumpet. Thank you so much, Terry. Justice says, what's your predictions for the style of landing legs they'll use for Mars, similar to lunar? That's a good question, Chris, because on the moon there's less gravity, so potentially you could have, less robust landing legs because you don't have to support quite as much mass or as much weight, I guess I should say, same amount of mass. But on Mars there is more gravity, so the load of the vehicle is going to cause more strain on the landing legs. So I'm not sure if they're going to have one design or if they're going to optimize the landing legs depending on what body they're landing on. What do you think, Chris?
Sure, I think it's something where they may be making design changes as we speak, because we know they've got certain plans for Mars, and it was something that Elon brought up about support for taking humanity to Mars the other day on Twitter, and he liked the tweet from me, which actually mentioned the Mars base alpha render, which showed the GIF of the Mars base being built up over time, because I love that GIF, and I mentioned the fact that that's something that sells that goal that he's looking for. I do believe him liking that may suggest there have got more renders to come of Mars missions, which will include, I would hope, video of a Starship landing on Mars. And that will give us some answers as far as landing legs go. So I'm hopeful for an update. I think the next major update will be when Elon goes down and does his once a year thing, where he gives an overview, like a 1 hour overview of the latest status of Starship. And that obviously didn't happen this year because of the pandemic situation, but hopefully later this year, there's probably an opportunity for him to do a new presentation. And during that, we'll get a lot more visuals, renders, information, and plans, which will keep us satisfied for at least another week afterwards.
I mean, there's a good time to do a presentation. I would think that now is a good time because they just landed a Starship. So, come on, Elon. I think on Saturday Night Live tonight, maybe we could get an update on Starship. What do you think, Chris?
I think there's very little chance of that happening. I think tonight will be all about Elon doing silly jokes and introducing guests. I think
though, if you want it to be funny, you need to do it sort of like the show that shows Silicon Valley on HBO. Like they did such a good job, fun of industry. You could totally do a skit on SNL where Elon's giving a presentation about Starship and something hilarious happened. I mean, it's something like that's already happened with the Cybertruck, where they broke the glass. They parody that with SNL. But what am I, no writer?
Yeah, make fun of the anomaly so far on SNL. That would be good.
If I had a suggestion for a skit on Saturday Night Live, I'd have him basically. If anyone's seen the movie where he goes, "Not quite my temper," Whiplash. That's the movie. Basically, he's at a production meeting where the Starship engineers are saying, "Well, do you want SN15 to launch again? Do you want SN16 to launch? Do you want to go orbital? Do you? Not quite my temper." not quite my temper, because that's what's Elon like. He has a whip and he's not afraid to use it.
Anyway, thanks to Jack for being on the SNL update being a good idea.
That reference of mine really crashed, didn't it? There was a big pause of about 5 seconds. I'm thinking, no one's laughing. Fair enough.
No, I was thinking of ways to add to it. Like, Elon, we can instantly assemble a starship. Not quite my. Elon, we're already on. Quite my. Elon, you're on Mars right now. Teleported you there. Quite my.
Jack just dies on us. He's like, where did Jack go? Out
Dan-
into the distance.
Dan's wondering what caused the fire. Any ideas, Chris?
Absolutely none. I mean, I assume some kind of leak, but they managed to put it out, and it may have run out of whatever it's supplying. So if it's like a methane leak, maybe the supply of methane to supply that fire was put out by the fact that it had some suppression, pad suppression, putting it out, and also the fact that it ran out of methane. So it could be something like that. We don't know. I hate speculating too much, but that's what I would have thought.
Wilbo asks, are any starships incorporating the thinner steel tested on SN7.2? What's the latest on that testing? So SN7.2 was successfully tested. That was a 3mm steel test tank. The current starships are using 4mm steel tanks. They did roll SN7.2 back to the production site, and we assume it is now retired. But the testing was successful, so we do think at some point we might see at least some portions of starships constructed out of 3mm stainless steel to save some mass. But we're not sure when that's going to be implemented, and I don't think it's been implemented yet.
A good question here, which I always like answering, which is about what's the progress on Phobos and Deimos. Those two former oil rigs have been in the process of being converted towards a facility for super heavy boosters to launch and land on. Again, I always pause when I mention that because right now we're seeing the actual launch site for super heavy, at least the first super heavies, being built at Boca Chica. But Elon has noted that they will use ocean-based platforms for Starship Super Heavy. The current progress is that Phobos, we know at least, is having its habitation modules removed. It's a part of its landing pad removed for the helicopters. So they are making it slowly but surely a clean pad situation on that platform where they'll then be able to build their own structures to cater for hosting the super heavy booster. But that's very exciting because that also removes a lot of the issues surrounding such a powerful rocket being launched not too far away from populated areas, because this is where we stand with the actual Boca Chica launch site is quite close to the South Padre Island area, and you really are firing up 28 engines. It's going to make quite a lot of impact to the local area, shall we say. So that is a partial solution to that going forward.
And we have another. Mary's tour of the production area continues. So headed up north a bit to, I guess not north, it's west, I think, to the gas site where they are constructing the integration tower, and we assume that these segments will be trucked down to the launch site on the self-propelled modular transporters, where they will of course be lifted by that large crane on to the launch tower segments that have already been installed. So they're basically going to assemble them off-site at the gas well area and then ship them pre-assembled to the launch site where they will be stacked together, and that's going to mean that the launch site integration tower is going to go up quite quickly. We can see some lifts here working on the tower now, and I think it's only going to be a couple of, maybe a month or two before this thing is assembled, Chris.
We were always assuming that the launch tower would rise out of the ground pretty fast because of the actual documented note that they wanted this orbital flight by July, which we all kind of like throw our hands in the air, thought, well, that's just too soon. But guess what? That's how Elon works. He works to a pushed schedule where maybe they'll miss it by a month or so, but it'll still be much sooner than had he not pushed. And of course, what they do need is that launch tower. And seeing these pre-built parts where they can just interlock them at the orbital launch site after rolling down Highway 4 gives me a lot of hope that they'll have this tower done maybe within a month. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea about construction timelines, but seeing these pre-assembled large sections already being fabricated down at the production site just shows how fast they could build this tower. And it's gonna be fascinating to watch.
And it makes total sense, Chris, because if you build it like this, you can work on. Right now, it looks like from the photos you've seen, they have 2 of the assembly jigs to support this construction, so they can essentially work on 2 pieces of the tower at once. Where if they built this directly on top of the existing structure, they would only be able to work on 1 at once. So they can kind of increase the production rate by, breaking up the production into chunks and then assembling the final pieces once they're ready.
A good question here from Ben, which I've not considered either. Will SN15 have recorded all of its flight video? If so, now that Starship is returning in one piece, will we see uninterrupted flight video one day? Very good question, because as with the drone ship landings with Falcon 9 boosters, we get a video back from the drone ship, which has recorded the video because they have a lot of shake and a lot of local disruption for the live views, which is why we see dropouts in the coverage during live launches. But when they bring the drone ship back to Port Canaveral, they then download the video the drone ship's taken, and they've got these fascinating pictures and views. We may see something similar from any onboard footage that Starship may have recorded. So that may be a potential, because the fact that we've not seen that yet from a previous Starship is the fact they've not survived after landing. They've either crashed or they've exploded after landing. So this is the first time they've got a vehicle back. So I think it's a great question, a great point, and something we'll have to look out for.
And Jack is now showing us the actual foundation and the first segment for the orbital launch integration tower at the launch site. So you can see that red crane on the right is what they're going to use to assemble the tower. The crane is, barely assembled. The actual crane is going to be taller than the launch tower. So the crane is going to be probably, I forget what the exact height is, but well over 400 feet tall. So it's going to be a huge crane. It's one of the largest crawler cranes in the world. And if you go back to Mary's camera here, you can cut back and forth and see how they're assembling this. So you have the launch tower itself, and then at the gas well site, you have these 2 segments being prefabricated before they head to the pad.
And is that the crane we're going to call Franken crane?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so that's the biggest crane they've got there. We thought Tangzilla was big, but this can be even larger. So Franken crane.
It's officially.
There we go.
No, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's Franken.
And now Mary is showing us those cryo shells, so the insulation shells that are also at the gas well site being constructed. So very, very cool, lots of activity, and it is incredible how many things they're building at once down in Boca Chica. So
Chat, it's decided that there's no vote on this. There's no voting name. We are calling it Franken crane. It has been christened. That is decided, and that's how we'll call it. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah, this installation shell will be placed on top of one of the existing ground support equipment tanks at the orbital launch pad. Jack, do you want to maybe pan your camera over to one of those tanks at the orbital launch pad? The burr might be in your way, I'm not sure, but there we go. Jack's got it. So that white shell on Mary's camera will be stacked on top of these silver tanks on Jack's camera here. So there's still a bit more assembly that's going to take place at the gas well site before that shell is ready. Obviously, it's a bit smaller than the height of those current ground support equipment tanks.
Chris asks, what would the orbital return corridor be for Starship, not the booster, to return to Boca Chica? I am thinking back on orbital trajectories. Unfortunately, I'm going to bring back the example of Columbia. When we lost Columbia, you saw the footprint of the debris, which was over South Texas. So that may be a similar kind of orbital trajectory for returning back to Boca Chica, where it'll come back over almost over the Pacific and into California. Maybe if they want to avoid flying over land, they might come up from a southerly direction up through the Gulf and land that way. We've seen no plans for this, so we were all speculating on that one, but that's the 2 options they've got. Could there be a benefit to launching multiple Starships in the same launch window? Maybe when fueling in orbit fuel tankers? Yes, indeed. Their big plan is past orbital is the refilling process, which is
Now let's see.
right. I think we're slightly coming back now. If anyone can hear me, 5x5. If I get a 5x5, yeah, there we go. The trick is when we do come back from a crash like that is to refresh the browser or make sure you select on the wheel 1080, because I know when it comes back for me, it comes back 240. It looks like something from 1980s. So if you have come back and it's looking a bit blurry, refresh and hit the wheel and go to 1080, and then you'll find you're back to normal.
Yeah, sorry about that. What happened was my internet crashed, and the server I was connected to did not safely handle that when I dropped out. So that's why the entire stream went down. Sorry about that, but we should be back.
Wolves asks if SN15 launches from Pad B, will that end curse? Yeah, there is no such thing as a curse on the launch mounts, but yeah, I do understand the question. I think the law of averages are might not even see that, because the way they're working, you got to understand that when they're pushing so hard for orbital, the concentration will be focused on the orbital launch site. So that's where they move on to that pad. So that's something where we'll have to just see what happens. But right now, the big question is what they're going to do with 15. With Elon saying they might, again, I'm stressing the word might refly SN15, it's a question of where they will put this vehicle back on to the mount, which mount as well. So, and then what they'll do with it once they put it on the mount, there's a good chance they may replace a Raptor or two. They may put a new setting. They may keep the Raptors in place, do a static fire test. They may just launch it. It all depends on lots of ifs and buts. If, and I again stress if, they do opt to refly SN15. And then we've got SN16 as well. So whether or not they'll go forward with SN16 or not, we don't know. It's in the high bay, it's stacked, it's ready to go. They could put 2 Starships on the launch routes again, like last time. Lots of things we're going to look out for. It's never a dull day at Starbase Base X Boca Chica. Glenn asks, could Starship come to a stationary orbit in low Earth orbit and then do a control 60-degree entry with a landing area? You know what? That's something you guys in KSB may want to try, because I don't know, but there's no plans for it. When I say I don't know, it's because I've not seen anything which relates to that, so that's why I'd like to say I don't know rather than guessing. But I do know there's a lot of people who play Starship in KSP and do a lot of things relating to that to find out how things work for them. It's not exact science, I know that for a fact, but it's something where people can play with things and get a good idea of how the vehicle performs in different scenarios.
If anyone has a good Starship ship file for KSP, like DM me or something, because I don't have one, and I'd love to mess.
I do believe, Jack, in our Discord, I remember Discord, we do have a KSP channel which people have been doing certain techniques and screenshots and videos from with their Starships in KSP, and they may have that file in question.
Yeah, good point. I like going in there and posting all my horrible creations, but I don't often make like real functional rockets or replica rockets. I'm sure somebody has a craft file at me. Members Discord. I'll download that craft file. Thank you.
Charlie asks, do you know if SN15 used its Starlink dish to transfer video and telemetry data to MC, to the Mission Control Center? We do know Starlink was on it. They went through all the regulations and we saw it on the actual vehicle. Whether or not that Starlink dish worked as planned and sent that data, we don't know, because that's something we will not know about in public. I would hope so. And if it did, it'd be something for Elon to tweet because it'd be a good advertisement for Starlink, which is something obviously SpaceX want to do well with. So it's a good question. We don't know the answer to it, but the question itself is interesting because that vehicle SN15 did have a Starlink dish on it.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I mean, I know they are obviously working on fixing that video problem, so hopefully we will see that resolved. But Starlink is definitely not needed to get stable video from Starship. They can get Falcon 9 to provide stable video just at the ground tracking stations, but I do wonder if perhaps they might try to use Starlink to get stable video or telemetry when it's re-entering and being surrounded by plasma from the side facing Earth, because we have seen, Chris, that Starlink antenna is on the side that would be facing upwards during re-entry.
Yeah, and I always just think of like the Deep Space Network and various different networks that NASA uses for communications with the ISS, spacecraft in orbit. And SpaceX itself have the tracking station here in Boca Chica. Maybe having a Starlink antenna on a vehicle makes needing different tracking stations all around the world a little bit less, necessary, or maybe it makes getting telemetry from the vehicle in what would otherwise be a dead zone or a pain in the butt, middle of nowhere type situation. Maybe that makes it easier. And I linked a photo. I don't know if you're easily able to show it, but I put a photo of the Starlink dish, or what we think is the Starlink dish, in our back.
And I think I do have that up now, so let's take a look. There it is from Jack of that Starlink terminal on the vehicle.
Yeah, I remember when Bergin was being built in the high bay, when they rolled it out, everyone was like, "What's about it? What's different about it?" Because we know that it's supposed to have hundreds of different. I think that was probably the only thing that I immediately noticed. Like, oh, that's new and different. What's that weird white circle?
For
From these
sure.
photographs, I find it fascinating when the close-up details we get from the photographs just show how much complexity involved. It is literally a big stainless steel tank from any viewpoint, but when you get close up, you see all the connections there for various things, power, fluid, and connection data. So you've got a lot of equipment on these vehicles, and you'll be getting a lot of data back from everything you see in this view.
Yeah, I took a 300 something megapixel image of SN15 yesterday and was editing it, and I noticed also with the nose cone, previously the way that they would lift the whole vehicle, there was sort of six, they look like big bolt holes where they would screw in shackles would be used to, 6 of them would be used to attach to the lifting squid. On 15, those circular attachment points at the top of the nose cone are gone, and they're replaced with vertical, it looks like little rectangles. And so there's some sort of different attachment, and that's another one of the details I've been able to notice that's different between 15 and previous ones. But yeah, the amount of details we're able to get, the closeness that we're able to get vehicles, it's just awesome.
John Clayton asked, could NSF use their connections to get an interview with whoever is the magician in charge of planning all this activity? You know what? That is something where I have thought about that several times, where we know whoever is planning all this build-up of what was just a tent 2 years ago into what we're seeing now at the production site and the launch site. It's incredible. It really is. It's not a purpose-built factory like ULA using Dakar, where it's all clean room and it's all fancy and brand new equipment. There's, everything's clean. It's out near the beach, but it works, and it is built up so fast compared to any other project I've seen as far as a launch site and production site goes. Whoever has been planning this has done a fantastic job, and it really has worked out for them very well, because we are seeing a super capable vehicle being tested at a facility where, if you look on Google Earth, I don't know if it's updated yet, but on one Google Earth I looked at a few months ago, it still just showed a road and a beach and Boca Chica Village, and not a lot else apart from that Starbase building, which they've converted themselves. So the amount of construction and hardware and facility and commodity tanks and even now vehicles that are hosted at this area, at these two sites, is an incredible amount of work in a very small period of time. I think people in chat, our moderators, may need to link Jack's Instagram again because Dan asks, Jack, have you shaved yet? And Elon says 20 would be the first orbital, the 6 SF15. Do you think that 17 will now be the first orbital? No, I think if they jump to orbital, it'll be whatever designated Starship that will be, which is currently SN20. That again is subject to change. They may make it 21 or 22. We know from Mary's videos and photographs they are way into the 20s now, so they have options. But as far as changing the designation to the mission, no, they've not done that in the past. I don't think they'll do it in the future. I think if they do decide to jump to orbital, let's just say hypothetically, they're happy with 15. They may refly 15, and then Elon says, "Okay, let's just go orbital. Let's just go for it. Whatever vehicle that will be, it'll be SN20, rather than promoting a vehicle like SN17. So that's how it'll work."
And Mary has moved to another location, so we've got an awesome shot of that orbital launch table that will support the Super Heavy booster and the Starship stack on the pad. And you can see not a lot of work on it right now, but lots of equipment out there, and they have been working hard on getting that ready in time for the orbital launch attempts. That table, of course, be placed on top of the orbital launch stand, which are those white poles you see in the center of your screen that kind of lean inwards, so that those will support that orbital launch table. I think there might actually be some additional pipes that kind of raise the height of the launch stand slightly higher before the table goes on top, but that table will be on top of that launch stand for Super Heavy. C.E. Newton, thank you for the support. Tennessee Ferry says, at ignition of SN15, is there a ring of flames that come out about 3/4 up in the flaps? Is there a gap in the shell rings? I did not see that. Did you, Chris or Jack?
I didn't.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and watch the video, but that's an interesting observation. Gary says, read a fire. There seems to be a small methane line or vent in that area that releases vapors the entire flight. SN10 did the same. Could that be? I think I know what you're talking about, but I think it is a liquid oxygen vent, although I could be wrong. So I'm not quite sure, but there is some venting lower in the vehicle, and I think that is the liquid oxygen dump line. I think we've even heard them call that out on the webcast around Apogee, but I'm not sure if that's the same line that you were talking about. Joe says, thanks, guys. Thank you so much, Joe, for the support. Mile Hunter with a membership. And Russell Snodgrass says, if Falcon 9 has to land on a downrange drone ship after reaching orbital velocity, then how can we expect a Super Heavy booster to return to Boca Chica? So Falcon 9 is capable of returning to the launch site with a boost back burn, although most missions do not have enough performance to allow that. But I think, at least for the initial Super Heavy launches, they will build in enough performance to return the Starship to the launch site with a boost back burn after separating the Starship vehicle. But in the future, we might see drone ship style landings of Super Heavy using Deimos or Phobos. Does that make sense to you, Chris?
Because we're talking about capability here. With as you mentioned, Vulcan 9 could quite easily return back to LZ1 if he wanted to, but it's a question of capability and the payload mass and all those parameters involved. So they don't want to penalize what they can launch by prioritizing getting it back to LZ1. They want to prioritize for the customer. So if they've got a payload capability that can get their satellite into orbit and then bring it back to the drone ship, that's just as good. That works for all concerned. It gets the booster back, it gets the payload up. That was always a question about reusability, and there's a lot of skepticism about it because they're saying you're going to have so much payload penalties involved with the amount of propellant you need left to bring the booster back. It wasn't viable. It's something that they've disproven to the point that they've shown they can do it in different scenarios. So that's why they have this drone ship capability. But where Super Heavy and Starship have so much capability, it becomes less of a question.
Yep, and of course, Starship can also be refueled in orbit, so that helps. You don't have to launch all your propellant on the first launch. Thank you so much, Russell. That was a super generous super chat. So we appreciate your support. I'm going to take a couple more questions from the regular chat before we wrap up. We have about 8 more minutes here. Carson asked some more details on what the launch table is for. So imagine the huge super heavy stack. It will sit directly on top of the table for launch. This table is essentially supporting the entire stack, and the table will likely have hold down clamps that will release the super heavy after it fires up its engines, and the engines all report that they're looking good. So you'll have hold down clamps, you might have umbilical connections on this launch table, and you will probably have some sort of telemetry connections as well. So lots and lots of things will be supported by this launch table. So it's one of the most critical portions of the launch pad. Did you notice how SN15 came in a 90-degree twist from the other Starship? Nose was facing the road, not the orbital tank farm. Yes, I did notice that. That's a good observation. I'm not sure why that happened, if it was intended or what, but it definitely rotated in flight. It did a bit of a roll. Chris,
Yeah, did you see the question for me there? Yeah. Why did Shuttle have dedicated OMS thrusters? Why not just use the RCS? Shuttle had the 3 main SSME engines, the RS-25Ds. They were for a launch. They were only used during launch, and that was it. For the rest of the mission, including landing, they were off and just along for the ride. With the OMS thrusters, they were the second most powerful engines. They had 2, port and starboard, and they would use them for orbital insertion. Because when you'd finished launching on the solid rocket boosters and onto the SSMEs, you were in a pretty much a suborbital orbit where you could drop off the external tank and it would then re-enter over the Indian Ocean and disintegrate. The OMS would then push it into the insertion orbit. So it was like a second stage burn, if you can imagine it that way. It would also be used for different orbital translations when and if needed, and those are power provided. The rest was RCS, reaction control system, and vernier thrusters, which were the very smallest of the thrusters, and they were for basically maneuvering and changing attitude for heating conditions, etc., etc. So those were the difference varying in power engines, but the OMS was needed for orbital insertion. Imagine your second stage Merlin vac engine. The shuttle's version was OMS.
got a question from that I have apparently lost. It was about SN20. Yes, it's from Jackson. SN20, will it be able to re-enter over or deorbit over Boca Chica? I don't know. I don't think so. If I had to guess, the FAA would not allow that. Elon has said he expects it to take several attempts to get the re-entry down, and if you're going to land at Boca Chica, that requires you to come in over the Pacific and then over Texas as you re-enter. So if something goes wrong, you could potentially be dropping debris on populated areas. So SpaceX is really going to have to prove that Starship can re-enter safely before they try to land at a place like Boca Chica, I think. But any other things to add, Chris?
No, I think that's about right. You've got to be careful with the authorities in charge of these things not to poke their nest too much, because they have got a lot of experience now with the FAA about their Starship testing. I think they now have a process in place where they can consult with them in advance, and I'm sure that's probably been a discussion already at some point.
Yeah, we might even see them just target a water landing at first.
Yeah,
way out over the Pacific. Of
which
course,
is what they did with the Falcon 9 boosters to start with as well. So that makes sense.
Of course, you lose the ability most likely to be able to properly inspect the vehicle post-flight. So it's by no means ideal. But the odds that it actually makes it to the point where it can softly land on the first try are slim anyway, and it reduces a lot of hassles getting FAA approval, and you're still able to downlink a ton of data. So I think we might see some splashdowns first, probably for Starship and definitely for Super Heavy, assuming they don't actually build Super Heavy landing legs and go straight to catching, because you do not want to, on your first Super Heavy landing, try to go for the catch and then blow up your launch pad in the process. So I think we'll definitely see the Super Heavy boosters do some soft landings, probably over the water, before they try to go for that first catch attempt on the launch pad. But we are running up on the end of our show time here, Chris. So any other final questions you want to take before we wrap up?
We've covered most of them. I think a lot of the questions now we're getting are just repeats from earlier. So if you rewatch the stream, because it is archived since we finish, you probably see a lot of answers to questions you may have if you joined late. But I would like to probably tail end this by saying, look at this view. This is a booster. This is a booster. This is a Starship that's landed. It's landed intact. It's survived. It's completed its mission. So we are making step-by-step progress with this test prototype vehicle, and it's exciting times. And it's only the start, because we have Super Heavy to look forward to. So by all means, stay tuned, be subscribed, keep watching the videos from Mary, and you'll see the progress day by day. And we are going to see a Super Heavy launch vehicle capability that can build a city on Mars. I keep saying that, but that's where we're going. That is something to look forward to. We may see a city on Mars in our lifetime.
We do have one more shot to show you. Mary just moved again, and you can see in the nose cone tent, they've got another nose cone coming along. Not sure what Starship that's for. Probably SN15 if I had to just go in numerical order, but so much progress at the build site. It is incredible, and there's so much progress that in our 90-minute episode here, we needed both Mary and Jack on the ground to get you all the views that we did. So very appreciative of both Jack, who was at the launch site with Starship SN15 post-landing. Thank you so much, Jack, for heading out there. Jack is at the Jack Beyer on Twitter.
Yep, no problem. Thank you everybody for watching and for all the support. I mean, I know we're wrapping up, but I do have a question for you guys. What was your favorite Starship so far?
Is there even a question, Jack?
It is. It is. What are you going to say? 15?
Actually, okay, no. I think the obvious answer is SN8. That's my opinion.
Kind of what I was getting at too. SN8 was amazing, and it came so close to landing. And I don't know, SN8 will always have a special place in my heart. The same way that Starhopper will always have a special place in my heart. But if you said SN15, I wouldn't fault you. Chris, what about you?
SN15, because you're only as good as your last Starship, but you never forget your first love. So maybe SN8 is a good point.
Yeah, I think SN8 just... The thing with SN8 is we had no idea what to expect. With SN15, we knew pretty much what to expect, and it was exciting that it landed, but I think you could imagine in your head what that landing would look like. For SN8, we had no idea what to expect. We didn't even know that the engines were going to cut off one by one on ascent. So I remember when the first engine shut off on SN8, yeah. People were like, oh no, they lost the Raptor a minute into flight. But it turned out that was totally planned and totally nominal.
My video
flight was just incredible.
A video from Isla Blanca Park has crowd reaction, like gasping. When that first engine shuts off, you can hear everyone like, "Uh-oh, oh, gee, I might gasp." So, I mean, that's a really good point, because a lot of times we hear rumors or someone has a little birdie or what have you, but on 8 there was really so much that was unknown, and that kind of made it extra special. Yeah, good point there. Either way, we can continue wrapping it up now. My bad. Thank you everybody for the support. Thank you to all my new patrons. If you want any of my imagery for downloads or whatnot, store discounts, prints on my store, I've got a Patreon. Thank you everybody. Thanks for all the support for the channel. Bye.
And then we also, of course, have Mary out in the field with the production site angles today. So thank you so much to Mary as well. She is rapidly approaching Chris B on Twitter, so we might have to officially call at BoCoTikaGal on Twitter the official account on NASA spaceflight here shortly, Chris. I don't know about that, but...
That's fine, because Mary can then start tweeting Shuttle Sunday.
Yeah, that's the thing. If Mary passes Chris on Twitter, she can be the official account only if she continues Shuttle Sunday, I guess.
That's right. That's the one caveat.
Okay.
How long until Starship comes in?
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
And then we also, of course, have Chris Bergin helping out with the questions. Thank you, Chris, for the help today.
Pleasure.
Make sure you follow at Chris on Twitter, at NASA Spaceflight. He's going to need your help to defend his lead in followers because Mary, like I said, is hot on his heels. It looks like Mary has 150,000 followers on Twitter right now, and you have 170. So Mary is closing in.
I would not be happier if Mary passed me. Trust me, she deserves it.
And then I am Michael Baylor, obviously, and I am at NextSpace on Twitter. I am light years behind both Mary and Chris, but thank you all for the support, and it was
Oh, hey,
awesome to get to see
really
all these
quick.
live views.
There's
Yes, Jack.
there's something being delivered to the launch site right now on a modular transporter. I don't know if you care.
Oh yeah, but this is what we saw on Mary's camera, and it was headed towards the launch site. So why don't you show us this before we wrap up? Let's see what we got. It looked like it was possibly a condenser of some sort when it went past Mary, but it was kind of, we only saw it for a second. So let's see what it is.
Oh, there's the party disco Tesla.
Yeah. I wonder what this is for. Is it some sort of ground support equipment for the orbital launch site, or is it something to do with maybe an upgrade for the suborbital test stand?
No idea what this is. Chat's thinking it's a transformer. Robots in disguise.
Yeah, it does kind of look like a chiller, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it has all those tiny thin pipes, so.
Yeah, everyone's saying transformer. So that it's been claimed it's a transformer. Optimus Prime.
We're about to get the side-on view here. That is a serious piece of equipment, though.
Yeah. I love these transporters though, because you got that bloke behind it who's basically got control. There he is. That's his job. He basically just he uses his little remote control and just follows them behind. He probably gets a lot of Fitbit miles in him.
I think it would be a fun job until it is 110 degrees and 90% humidity on that summer day in Boca Chica, and you have to drive the Starship down Highway 4 at 1 mile per hour while walking. That would be rough. There you go. It looks like there are perhaps 2 of them on that transporter, yes. And they have arrived at the launch site. So I think that is going to do it for NSF Live today. Thank you all for tuning in. We also, of course, will thank our members in a second once this drive's passed. But if you are a member to the channel, you get access to Discord if you're a Capcom or higher. If you are a Red Team or higher, I think there's early access to Mary's video clips. And if you are on the pad rat, you at least get some emojis. So different perks for every tier, and we appreciate everyone's support. Anything else I missed, Chris?
I think that's it.
It looks like, based on where this is going, it's probably going to the orbital launch pad because it's going from right to left on our screen, which means it is passing the suborbital area and headed to the orbital area. And Mary posted a cool shot of it in our back channel too, so I expect we'll have more coverage of this move in our daily video today, which of course will be published later this afternoon. I do remember one thing we missed, Chris. There is a Starlink launch tonight. We mentioned it earlier, but make sure you do not forget to tune in for our Starlink coverage tonight. It is a historic launch. It might be early morning depending on your time zone, but it's SpaceX is going to fly a booster for the 10th time. Elon will be making good on his promise to do so, and we will have live coverage of that starting about 45 minutes before liftoff. So around 5 UTC or 2 a.m. Eastern on Sunday morning, which is just over 12 hours from now. So tune in for that, and it'll be super exciting to see a Falcon 9 launch for a 10th time. And there you go, right up to the orbital launch pad tanks, it looks like. So real quick, here are our members that are on the launch director and flight engineer levels. Thank you all for the support. It means a lot to us, and all these members make it so that we can make sure we have enough money on a monthly basis to fund all of our data and reoccurring monthly expenses, because obviously we don't know if there's going to be a Starship stream to rely on every month. So your reoccurring monthly support really means a lot to us, and it makes it possible for us to do what we do. So thank you for all the members. But if that, I think we are ready to shut down for today. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you all later this evening or early tomorrow morning for that Starlink launch. See you all then.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
Alright, the chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll with Atlantic. Flight downside speed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.